So it's a common misconception that your life needs to be filled with as many positives or highs as humanly possible. Actually sounds exhausting. When in reality, highs and lows undulate all the time, and sometimes that's for the best. But if you pay close attention to the distance between the lows and the highs, rather than the frequency of either, you might just be able to make your highs seem, well, higher.
So some of you may have heard this story before, but when I was in hospital, I was in a coma for a couple of weeks. And when I came out of the coma, I hadn't had a glass of water in, well, a couple of weeks. To make matters worse, I had a tube down my throat breathing for me and a drip that was giving me all my liquids, so absolutely no water. My mouth was the driest it has ever been in my entire life. I felt like I'd been lost in the desert for weeks on end, unable to drink any water. My tongue felt like sandpaper and it was like there was cigarette ash all through my mouth and inside my cheeks. I tried to communicate with people as best I could that I wanted water through a series of blinking because I had the tube down my throat. I was actually unable to be given water because I was laying down and they feared that it would give me pneumonia. I had dreams about drinking water, literal dreams. One of them I remember swimming through a swimming pool of fresh water and just drinking it as I went on. I remember having another dream where I wanted them to position one of those water coolers just above my hospital bed, right over my head, and just leave the tap running into my mouth. Weirdly, I think that's actually literally dreaming of being waterboarded. I wanted to go down to the pub down the road where I thought I was in Balmain and have a huge schooner of just water. That's how much I really wanted water. This story and many fine other ones available in my book, which is actually available in many fine bookstores and probably some crap ones. I convinced a nighttime nurse, I think his name was Ryan, to give me one single ice cube in one of those styrofoam cups that they would give you crap coffee in. The moment that ice touched my lips for the first time was a euphoria like I've never had before. I think about that moment all the time, and here's the weird thing. I remember thinking at that time that I would never take water for granted again. And I absolutely haven't.
In this situation, there was clearly something that I'd taken for granted, like the ability to have a glass of water when I damn well pleased, contrasted with the complete lack of that thing to a point that drove me completely insane. The sheer delta between the lows of that situation and the high point of plentiful, accessible water has made me appreciate every instance of something as simple as drinking water since the event itself. Not only does traversing challenging times help you to appreciate the good times, but it can even improve those moments by shining a candid light on positive things in your life that you have, but to which you may not be paying attention. Appreciating the people around you, for instance. Even if you've never been without them before, but steeped in the reality that they could just as swiftly be gone tomorrow. Just the knowledge itself that things can take a turn for the worse should be a warning of sorts to all of us. After having come close to death myself and realizing how easily this can all be switched off for us, it became more important than ever to prioritize certain aspects of my life. I wasn't going to waste time with certain types of people, but made sure not to take the people for granted I wanted to keep around, and to appreciate their presence and effect on my life as much as possible. I didn't want to waste my time doing something vocationally that felt like was just going through the motions of life or traveling a path so many before me had solely because it was well worn. I wanted to carve out my own path. I mean, it's different for everyone, of course, but we all have things in our lives that we once wanted and now take for granted. The list of salient realizations birthed from adversity goes on, and I won't bore you with it further. But suffice to say that as a tool for casting a ray of perspective on your life, the hard times and challenging moments do a damn good job. The key is trying to remember this during the hard times. When things like that happen, imagine metaphorically taking a photo of the situation on a Polaroid camera and sticking it to your wall to use as a snapshot to draw upon in the future. Something to remind you of how bad things can get at times when they're not. This does require you to be in the moment for a second. Take everything in and record it. Try to remind yourself that, like everything else, it's also temporary. And if you can use this downturn like a yardstick from which to measure future states of success or happiness, then it's not a completely useless exercise. So using this as a mechanism can help to ease your transition from the lows we all experience to a better future. So I've had at least 3 instances of drinking water this week. in which I've actively remembered being back in that hospital bed and the feeling of not being able to drink water. I can viscerally recall the sensation of sandpaper in my mouth and how I longed for a simple luxury of which I had previously taken for granted. Those 3 glasses of water this week were better than any of the others. That week of being stranded in a figurative desert just happens to be the gift that keeps on giving. This episode's quote is brought to us by Epicurus, who said, "Do not spoil what you have by desiring what you have not. Remember that what you now have was once among the things you only hoped for." This is a great insight and reminds us once again that all of the things that you have now that you probably take for granted were some of the things that you wanted in the past, the things that you felt like you couldn't be happy without. Now that you have them, you ought to be happy, right? Well, part of this is kind of living on the hedonic treadmill, but it reminds us that that yearning and that desire that we have for the things that we don't have often takes the focus off what we do. And the more we focus on what we do, the more we can appreciate our lives and be happy in the moment rather than delaying that happiness into the future. And that's all from me.